Welcome to Meadowlarkers 48. What are you, stupid? I mean, that's the question that everyone's been asking, so I think that we might as well just title this episode either the kind way is what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Or what are you, stupid? Either way, but before we get into that, the question is today is who is our honorary captain for Meadowlarkers 48? I'm counting of the great 48s. I'm thinking Pablo Sandoval, the San Francisco Giants. I'm thinking Torrey Hunter, the great Minnesota Twin, Detroit Tiger Angel. I'm thinking, of course, Jacob deGrom, Hall of Famer Lee Smith, maybe the former the Washington football team's Stephen Davis, or even Philadelphia Eagles safety Wes Hopkins, Rick Russell.
Can we go DeGrom?
DeGrom's got to be the guy, right?
Everybody? Okay, if everyone else is okay with that, I would like to go DeGrom. Just personal hometown hero, you know?
And he's like great.
Nazi Muhammad raises some objections, but I think we're going to allow it.
Nazi Muhammad is good. I like that, but it's got, I mean, if DeGrom, hey, come on.
Hey.
That's just being a contrarian right there.
National championship and an NBA title.
Also true.
What's
true.
DeGrom ever won?
Let's throw this out. The what are you thinking? What are you, stupid? We've been a week now. A week of digestion of the Robert Sarver story in Phoenix. And a week, of course, of the Boston Celtics in Udoka. Media Day was the other day, Monday in the NBA. Obviously, neither one of those franchises were talking very much basketball. I mean, let's kick this over to you. Having a week to digest, go in whatever direction you want to go. If you want to go Celtics, go Celtics. If you want to go Suns, go Suns. If you want to combine the two. But having a week of digestion of these two stories, where are you at right now?
Well, first of all, if I'm Robert Sarver, I'm writing a very heartfelt thank you note to the Boston Celtics organization because they just knocked his ass off that spotlight, that platform where everybody was just throwing rotten tomatoes and cabbage and whatever they used to do back in the Elizabethan era. And we got a new kind of dunce of the class that's getting a lot of the focus and attention. I to be honest with you, I think the Sarver stuff has already, by this point, if you're listening to this podcast, you've already heard it all.
It's off the front page.
Yeah, I mean, and it was. I mean, I don't know if there are any further iterations to the story after, you know, that last statement he put out where he said he's selling the team and he's delusionally blaming everybody else, saying it's everyone else's fault. But as I said, I think there's a wealth of at least my opinions out there on this that I don't think we need to rehash that. But the Udoka story is fascinating on so many levels. On the most basic level, it is the title of this episode. What are you, stupid? What were you thinking, right? But it reaches out with tentacles in all different directions about the confluence of workplace etiquette, about the role of public versus private people, or public personas versus regular citizens, about the TMZification of mainstream news and particularly mainstream sports news, and about power, right? Power dynamics along gender lines, along race lines. There's so much happening all within this one news story that I think there's a lot of different directions you can go with.
And we're going to. We're going to. Kate.
Choice, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Kate, where are you at on this?
The one facet of this story, I mean, that I when you were listing the facets, the one you didn't touch on was sports media and how sports media covers things, how Twitter plays into the dysfunction of sports media, how the irresponsibility of how the beginning of the Celtics story was introduced to the public, put a framework on it that was so loose as to then be kind of misunderstood as it was carried forward. And I mean, what's that background noise? Is that me? Can you guys hear that?
No.
You can't hear? Okay, then I won't worry about it. All right, 3, 2, 1. As I was watching both those stories play out, but more specifically the Celtics one, I was actually just thanking my lucky stars that I wasn't still at ESPN and doing a show like filling in for somebody on First Take or, doing any of the talking head shows, because it's the kind of story that you can't have an informed opinion on, like a truly deeply informed opinion, because if you did and you'd report it out, like I know you're plugged into a lot of these places, you might have the information, but you're not really allowed to say it at certain points. So you're trying to then like shape your opinion to hint that you know something, but you can't actually articulate what you know, or you're just somebody who is pontificating about something that you truly know nothing about. And all of us have been inside certain stories where you actually know the truth, and then you're listening to the commentary about it, and you know how gray it is and how multi-sided it is, and then you hear people's opinions on it and you're like, wow, this is just not the reality of the situation. And so I really think we should, Howard, I know you're kind of the point guard on this one, but the how revelatory this Celtic story is about what can be the vapidness of sports media is really been top of mind for me.
Well, let's talk about this. Number one, right? Well, let's frame this. So the initial story comes out from Woj, essentially a vague announcement that something is up with the Boston Celtics, and that the coach, Ime Udoka, is facing possible discipline, perhaps as much as a suspension. Then we find out that it could be as much as a year suspension. Then we get another report from Shams that's talking about this being a workplace issue, that Ime Udoka was involved with a female staffer. During all of this, we hear nothing from the team. And we're waiting, and this is almost 24 hours before we find out that, and indeed this takes place, that Udoka is suspended for a year by the Celtics, as the Celtics say, for violation of team rules. In between that, you had a frenzy of people doing two things. One, trying to find out what happened. Two, once it became out into the public that there was some relationship that took place between Udoka and a staffer, who were these people? So the women who worked for the Boston Celtics were essentially exposed for a 24-hour period, exposed to essentially just online speculation into all of their public and all of their personal lives, with no protection from the organization whatsoever. Now, to me, one of the first questions that came out of this was the journalistic responsibility of being first versus being right versus having the information without getting a lot of help from the team. So my question journalistically first, Kate, is this. What is your feeling over those 24 hours when we haven't heard from the Celtics? We know something is coming. We don't know what. And then we have this vacuum in between. And I just say one other thing about this is the word media covers a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Media and journalism are not the same thing.
Yep. And this is where, Amin, I do think it would be helpful. I can't remember if we've done this online or offline, where you really take us through what the space of Twitter, the economy of Twitter is when it comes to how people report things on there and what the incentives are to be first on certain things, because the space that this broke was within, the dueling reporters of the NBA, Shams and Woj, who are usually battling for some tidbit of contractual nugget. Transactional information, that the stakes of which are not incredibly high from an interpersonal standpoint. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they're just addicted to the space, and I'm not saying they are, but like the sports media is, and maybe them, they couldn't even on this story take a step back and think about that. Maybe it shouldn't have the same capsule and framework as a 3-year deal announcement would have, because this seems like the kind of story where you don't need to be a brain surgeon to go one step forward and be like, if I put out this piece of information, what might be the cascading effects of it? And so, I didn't have, Howard, to your question, in the first 24 hours of specifically the Celtics story, even as like a lot of the women within the Celtics organization were being bantied about as speculation of who might have been involved in this.
And
I
later
didn't really,
doxed.
and I didn't, yeah, exactly. And I really didn't see a way the Celtics could fix that for them. Because, what were they going to be able to say? They were going to say, it doesn't involve Allison Feaster or XYZ. And then it's like, well, who didn't they name?
Exactly.
There was no way at that point for the Celtics to fix what was happening. And so I think, just to toss it to you, I think it would be good for our listeners to kind of, if you can take us through the economy and the incentives of Twitter as a place to break news and how it might have impacted the story.
Well, first of all, what I'm going to say is we're not allowed to call anybody addicts, but we can say that they displayed the behaviors of an addict.
Who are they?
Newsbreakers. Let's call them newsbreakers. And in this case, let's call newsbreaker Adrian. Because when you put out a tweet that says something's about to happen, but I really can't tell you anything more than that. You guys have both been journalists working at both newspapers and a national or international media conglomerate. You've got a lead on a story. You go to your editor or to the news desk and you say, this is what I got. What are they telling you? Is it, all right, rush to public with this? Or do they tell you, okay, come back when you got some more? Or come back when whoever your source is, who is not allowing you to reveal, allows you to reveal. But you don't get to go sprinkle, 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 breadcrumbs, breadcrumbs.
Really?
And do you? I'm asking.
Well,
so
let's put it this way. So much of the story has been broken down to what we think we know. Let's just try this, okay? From a journalistic standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Let's suppose, and I'm just going to throw a hypothetical out there because I'm not on this story, but just thinking about the way journalism is supposed to work and the way that it does work often. You're in the middle of a conversation with a member of the Celtics, okay? And we're talking about the season. We're talking about Robert Williams and about his knee surgery. And gee, I don't really know, what Imi's rotation is going to be now that we wait for Williams to come back. And then you hear an offhand comment or something along the lines of, well, Imi won't even be the guy making that decision. And then all of a sudden the ears go up. What do you mean he's not going to be the guy? Now, suddenly that's news. What is happening? What did you just say? What was just inadvertently or indirectly leaked to me? Mm-hmm. Right? So now you have one piece of information. I can't tell you any more than this, but I can tell you that something's really big, that Ime Udoka is probably not going to be coaching this team this year. Mm-hmm. That's news.
Is that news you run with?
Well, here we go. So that piece of it is news.
Right.
So then one of the things that I've always done, and I don't mean to out myself in this, but I don't really think I have any choice. The last thing you do, to me, as a reporter, when you know you have something but you don't have it all, you don't fucking tell anybody. Mm-hmm. Because the minute you go to your editors, they want it out there. And now the pressure's on. Now it's out of your hands. And I'm not talking about Woj or Shams or anything on this story. I'm just talking about historically for me, I don't tell them anything.
So you're saying
because they're going, what's that?
The dynamic is opposite of what I imagine it to be, which is rather than them saying, come back when you got something more.
No.
Saying,
No. The question is, what can we use?
Right.
What can we say? When I was at the San Jose Mercury News, one of the most frustrating things about working at that place was We were in the middle of competition. It was in the 90s. It was the rise of Silicon Valley. And all of a sudden, the little San Jose Mercury News that nobody really cared about outside of chips and semiconductors, right, was suddenly in the news. We were a big deal now because suddenly internet technology was taken over and people were buying computers. And all of a sudden it was like, now we were, Silicon Valley, the dot-com boom was coming and we were the sexy thing. And now we were competing with the Chronicle, and not just the San Francisco Chronicle, but now we're competing with the Wall Street Journal, and now we're competing with the LA Times and the New York Times. We're in the act. And one of the things that always happened with the editors at that place was in every story, I was covering business back then, not sports, and every time I said 100 in the lead, the editor would say, can we say thousands? And every time I said thousands, they would say, can we say tens of thousands? And so everything got escalated to the point where, wait a minute, my name's on this shit. Okay? And I don't want to push this beyond what I know. What I know right now is thousands. But it is potentially hundreds of thousands, right? I'm like, potentially? Okay, let's do that. So all of a sudden, now this is out of your hands. And as a younger reporter, you don't necessarily have the juice to feel like you can control your information as well as you should. Now, obviously, that's not the case on a story like this with veteran reporters and everything. But what I'm saying is that the pressure to elevate and escalate and be first is a real pressure. And the story itself, to what Kate was saying earlier, this type of story changes dramatically because now we're not just talking about a three-way deal between the Pacers, the Lakers, and the Raptors. Right now, we're talking about people's lives inside of an organization.
Particularly people who did not sign up.
That's right. However, though, that's right. But is it possible to say, in a first news alert, there is information coming out of the Boston Celtics that is unclear, but out of the Boston Celtics organization, that head coach Ime Udoka is facing a possible suspension of a year for an undisclosed infraction that is currently being debated inside of the organization.
That is better language than what was revealed about this story early on, Howard. You're absolutely right, because it doesn't introduce the idea of consensual, non-consensual relationship, all of these words in the framework around a story that lights people's brains up. And it gives them a piece of information about their team that gets to the heart of the matter without clearly, I think, Amin, and I want your perspective on this. It seems like the framework of how this story was released through an agent, like Udoka's agent. Like it seemed like it had to be coming from an angle that is something we have talked about before when information is coming to you from an angle.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to figure out. Who benefited from having this story come out as quickly as it did? Before the Celtics not only hadn't prepared a statement, they hadn't even prepared the discipline. They didn't know what they were going to do with him. It took them a strong 12 hours, maybe more, from when the story broke to when they were like, oh, okay, he's suspended for a year. Man, like, to me, first of all, how big is the circle of people who are talking at that point internally?
It's got to be pretty small.
And yet, large enough, not small enough to keep that shit in house. Not small enough to make sure the five of us in this room, or however many, it stays here.
I mean, let me stop you right there. Mm-hmm. Because there's one other thing that we know about sports. In the 30 years I've been doing this, when an organization wants to keep a secret, they can keep a secret for a pretty good length of time.
I'm staggered. I'm staggered by how that statement seems to be less and less true every single day with every report that comes out. The number of teams I can count on one hand that I think can actually keep a secret.
Well, can they keep a secret, or do they no longer want to keep a secret?
No, or they remain desiring of keeping secrets. How about that?
Great. And how about exactly? But let's just, for perspective, let's go back 30 years. Okay, let's go back 31 years. The Los Angeles Lakers, if I'm not mistaken, they kept Magic Johnson's HIV diagnosis a secret for it was like 3 weeks.
Yep. They flew him home from Utah, from a preseason game in Utah, because he had flu-like symptoms. And the guys were all joking, like, oh, yeah, where'd you go out last night? It's Salt Lake City. And the players knew, I want to say, and a short amount of time before the press conference. They were told, and then they went out and showed up to the press conference. Now, obviously, it's a little different, right? Back then, if Byron Scott wanted to let Bill Plaschke know, Byron Scott would have to rush to a payphone, right, and put a quarter in, and hello, is Bill there? No, he just left. He went to the office. Oh, crap. Okay, hang up. Hey, is Bill at the office? Oh, he's not here yet. I'll let him know when you call. Okay. It's not like what it is now, which is, I'm hearing that Magic, type, right. text, right? The technology has changed the ability to keep a secret, right? Because it used to be, again, if there's 5 people in this room,
you had to take steps.
Yeah.
You don't have to take steps anymore.
No, well, you have to take different kind of steps.
And there's less friction. There's less friction to executing those steps. And
also real quick, I feel like we exist in a culture, at least in basketball. I can't speak for all sports, but there seems to be people getting off on being the one to tell, hey man, I got all the scoops. Let me tell you something. So-and-so's out for 7 to 9 weeks because of a knee. Like there is something in our industry, in the NBA, where people get off on doing that, and maybe it's like the quid pro quo. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate.
Well, isn't it? I mean, it also seems to me, just as you're talking, I mean, that the same way that we get our adrenaline rush from seeing tweets come in, seeing the notifications happen, I think that happens to people who are providing the information.
Well, absolutely. We're in the news business to be first.
Not the people.
The sources.
Not the
She's talking about the sources.
You mean the sources? Ah, yes. Also, to be.
It would be like, okay, cool. So I gave him that tidbit that 3 days from now is in the Sunday edition of the Times.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite as much of a rush as following this news story from afar, seeing people on First Take dance around the information you've given them. I do think there is a high baked into our news cycle right now that didn't necessarily exist 25 years ago. And then at the risk, I mean, we don't need to go down this path, but I do think it's worth noting that when we were talking about the facets of this story, one thing that I kept thinking about was like, this is almost like a story that exemplifies the destructive nature of an ad-based click economy.
Yeah.
I mean, in that, because if you weren't driven, if your editors weren't, and Woj wasn't, and Shams wasn't driven by whatever artificial economy has been set up, that like if you're first, you get more looks and more retweets, which I don't even know ultimately what the benefit of that is, but we certainly, whether or not it's hollow, we believe it. And I mean, just as a little background, it's like I was listening to a podcast last week about talking to Mark Andreessen, the investor who did like
the legendary Mark Andreessen.
Yeah. And the question on the table to him was like, when the internet was first being set up, why did it go to an ad-based model? And he was just explaining that at that time, no bank, because they were trying to figure out how to get banking into the internet early on so that people could actually pay for what they wanted. And banks could not figure out how to bake that into the internet from a pure technology standpoint. And so they were like, well, whatever, let's just run banner ads because we can figure out how to do that. And then we fast forward, whatever it is, 30 years, and the fact that the internet is an ad-based economy has more devastating effects than we could ever realize. One of them being this like microcosm of, you're a woman working in the Celtics organization, and Woj and Shams are battling for this artificial economy of clicks and attention. So they put out a story before they have all of the information, and you see how it plays out from there. And I mean, you didn't quite get to the heart of like the artificial economy of Twitter when it comes to NBA news.
Well, let's go one.
Real quick, that's the wild part about it, because there is no value to the news organizations. And dare I say they're the only value that exists is to Twitter itself. Twitter gets to reinforce its status as you want to know where things happen first. You get it here. You don't get it on Instagram with their pretty pictures. You don't get it on TikTok with their little dances. You get it here. This is where the news happens. And so the newsbreakers are incentivized to be first on the scene enough time so that they build their own reputation, because even now there are plenty of stories that break with smaller reporters first, but when one of these national guys breaks it after them, they get a lot of the credit because that's where people are following. But again, all of this is all based in psychic benefit, psychic compensation. There's no real money for these people, right? The real money is going to Twitter, because the reality is The Athletic, for instance, does not benefit from Shams breaking the story. You might say they benefit from people wanting to know more, and then they click on the link of the story that comes out later that goes to The Athletic that you have to subscribe to, $4 a month or whatever. Okay, but a lot of times these newsbreakers, like have you ever read an Adrian Wojnarowski tweet and then read the follow-up like write-up that he does? Rarely do you discover new things in the write-up. It's like when your teacher says, "Oh, give us 700 words on this," and you're struggling with cannot instead of can't and do not just to get to the word limit, because there is no extra to it. It's just fluff. I got everything I needed from the tweet. And so if that's the case, and the conversions from tweet to the actual link are actually limited, like a direct mailer that you find in your mailbox telling you to go to Pizza Hut for 2-for-1s or whatever, then why do we value this so much unless you are Twitter?
Well, there is value. There is absolutely value in it. And part of that value is the speed of being the person that, for that individual person, there is value. It increases your followers, and and people do whatever algorithms they use, there is inherent value in trying to create yourself as the person, as the go-to, when all the players are out there, retweeting you and talking about you. And also, let's not forget too, the number of ex-players who are all sitting there trying to maintain their positions as insiders. Everyone needs to be an insider, that their value is based on this. But it comes at it, as Kate was saying, it does come at a specific cost, which is this journalistic question that we've all had. Let's go to one other question journalistically to the next step here, which is the trickle. Now we have an idea that Udoka is facing a suspension. Now comes the next trickle. There's a relationship involved. Now we're talking privacy versus the organization. Now the next wave in this conversation was a whole bunch of people on the internet trying to figure out, one, who these people were, and then a secondary conversation too, which was, is this anybody's business? And why is this anyone's business? And Kate, you brought up a point that's really important earlier about the language that we're using. I had been tripped up for the life of me during this period on how often I kept hearing about the word consensual. And I was thinking throughout this, well, what does consensual mean in a work framework when you're not peers, when you're not equals, when one person controls the other person's money? I'm like, this is not a private matter. If you're the Boston Celtics, it's certainly not a private matter, because you are dealing with whatever is happening inside of that organization. You're trying to stay out of court. And it isn't a consensual thing when one person has power over the other, when one person controls the other person's money, when one person does the hiring and the other person does the firing, when it's a labor situation, one is management, one is an employee, what all of these different things come into it. And I was thinking, this is not a private matter at all. This is a workplace news story.
By the way, the other part of this that kind of confused me was, at what point was it revealed that this woman worked under Ime Udoka? And what I mean by that is this: the structure of an NBA organization is kind of weird. It's almost like two towers with like a walkway in between. And one tower is basketball and the other tower is business. So if there's someone in accounting who is a junior director or whatever, and then over here you've got the assistant general manager. Sure, on an org chart, you say, well, this is clearly higher than this, but there is not a direct line of report there.
Straight through line.
And in other words, the assistant general manager can't tell you what to do with regards to your job or anything else. I'm not trying to, I felt like one of the things that happened, particularly in the analysis that happened after the news broke, even as we got more and more information, was people taking leaps about Ime Udoka. I'm like, well, wait a second, hold on. Like, not saying that it's an appropriate relationship, but I'm just saying I don't know if like he has the power dynamic of being her boss or even having any sort of impact on her job, whatever it is. Maybe she is. Maybe she's a basketball ops assistant or whatever, and in which case, yes, there is a direct thing there. Yeah. But if she's an account executive on marketing partnerships, like, I mean, what's he gonna do? Go walk into her boss's office like, yeah, I don't really like how she's been selling or activating our partnerships. That's not even a conversation he could have without coming off looking crazy.
But I mean, there's a little bit of naivete there, in that, like, if you are working within the Boston Celtics organization, regardless of what tower you're in, regardless of whether your direct report goes up through the business side to, the VP of business ops, there's clear cultural, non-hierarchical power being held by the head coach of the Boston Celtics. That even if he doesn't like sign your bonus, if you are approached by him or if he asks you to do something, even if it, and I'm not even saying anything of a relationship or sexual nature, like, you're clearly going to be like, who's the big dog in this equation? That I think a lot of people, at least in a lot of the sports environments I've been in, that even if they weren't in your direct chain of command, like, name whatever NBA player, they're not really even in the hierarchy, but would you assume that they had way more power than you? Absolutely. And I think that word of consensual is like key to this conversation, because
yes, absolutely.
Because the fact that it is put out at the front of this story being released, and that, just to back it up, I've worked on within college basketball news stories as a journalist about relationships and improprieties at the college level that have impacted coaches, like an athletic director, coach issue. And the way that they each saw the relationship was baffling. Like, the man with more power seemed to think, oh, I thought we liked each other, and I thought that, that this was a consensual relationship. And the coach or the assistant coach was always like, how could he have thought that? Like, I am just trying to live my life over here and I have to appease him. And it seems so clear to the woman that something was not consensual. And so there, again, to our beginning, like, there's so much gray area, and that word puts a label on it. It puts a label on it like this was consensual, when it's like, well, from whose position and from whose point of view?
That's right. And here's the other thing too, is that as much as we talk about sports being $1 billion industry, it really is run like a high school in a lot of ways, right? There's the principal, who's the owner, there's the AD, who's the GM, and then there's the coach. And they have incredible latitude and incredible sway over everything. I remember thinking when I was covering the A's, the number of times I would ask, what's the baseball side have to do with this part? They have a say on everything in a lot of ways, to Kate's point, because you know who the big dog is. You know that the reason why we're here is this thing here, which is the manager and the players. And then everything else sort of flows from that, even though it may not be a direct line in it or a direct report. But the language piece of this is so important, because the thing that has kept coming back to me, Amin, on this is when you have that dynamic, there's no such thing as consent. It's really not consensual in that when you have a massive imbalance between your position in this hierarchy, and everybody else. Is it even possible to have something be consensual when you have that much more power over everybody else in the office?
I mean, I at that point, but are we talking about the power of celebrity here?
Well, there's another piece of that, but when I say now, that's another story. I'm just talking about inside the building. Inside the building, is it even possible? Let's give you an example here. Kate, when were you at it? You were at ESPN in 08?
Yeah.
Were you there 08? You were there.
Yeah. Oh, I started in 09 and I.
09? I mean, when were you there?
9 years later.
I got there 2012, late 2012.
Okay, 2012. So that's already passed. Okay, so it had to be my first or second year. So it's 07 or 08. ESPN is going through these crazy spate of very public, very public and embarrassing moments in terms of relationships. There was the Steve Phillips relationship that blew up. There was the Tony Kornheiser and Hannah Storm thing that he had made a comment about her on the air. There's all kinds of stuff was happening. We got called in, had to be 08, I think. We got called into a mandatory meeting, company-wide mandatory meeting, meaning everybody had to be there in Bristol. And I was scared to death because it was like, you have to be here. And it meant everybody. And me, I thought that we were all getting called in because, this was right when the economy was coming, it was right when the housing crisis was happening. Yeah. Everything was tanking. And I thought that this entire meeting was being called in to tell us that we were going to do some belt tightening. I thought that because I was like, I had just gotten hired. I'm like, are we really going to have layoffs and shit? Am I going to lose my job after moving here? I thought that it was, or that we were going to be told that because, ESPN was so remote, everybody could live where they wanted, that now you had to live closer to ballparks or whatever. I'm like, do I have to move back to a city or whatever? Because I was living out in the mountains. And so we get to the office, we get to Bristol, and there's 6 director chairs on the stage, and everyone's there, and everybody is there. I'm looking up, and there's Bill Walton and Matt. I'm like, this got to be serious. The whole damn company is here. And then George Bodenheimer, the president, is talking, and everything he's saying is punctuated with a sentence that says, failure to follow these guidelines may result in your permanent separation from the company. And I'm like, what is happening here? Finally, as he keeps talking, and I had, and by the way, in every chair had these little index cards with a pencil on them. So I just kept writing. I think I was sitting next, I don't know who I was sitting next to. I think it was Rick Riley. And I just put question marks on my mind, like, what is this about? And finally, it came forward that here's what it was about. Y'all need to stop messing with each other in the office. That clearly there was some breaking point, whether it was the Steve Phillips thing, but there was enough of a number of embarrassing moments. In that meeting, we were also told that if you wanted to date people in the office, you had to register with Human Resources. You had to tell people.
Yeah, disclose, yep.
You had to disclose. And I was like, oh, I'm in the clear. This has nothing to do with me, but something else is going on here. And so to me, what I found really fascinating about that was there is very clearly a power relationship that has to be factored in, that the word consent is something that I thought was the most dangerous word that was tossed around during this entire story. Because I was like, well, wait a minute, what's actually taking place here? And as we find out more information, that word is going to be more and more and more on trial.
Yeah. And one thing that is sort of comes off of that, Howard, like the word consent, and really like what we're talking about here is like, just to be straightforward, like having women in men's professional sports.
And that was the next piece that we wanted to go to.
Yeah.
That was.
And please take it away, because I think you.
I was going to say, let's just move over to another piece of this, which is that sports is the last boys' club. And when you start thinking about what sports has been, obviously, for everything we're talking about, whether we're talking about protest and kneeling and Me Too and the rest of it, maybe the most remarkable thing that has taken place over the last 10 years has been the change of personnel. You've got women coaching. You've got women in sports, in places in the industry now where they had never been. Maybe periodically you might get an assistant trainer. You might get some sideline reporters here and there. You'd get in-studio stuff. But now sports is moving into a new era where it is more and more and more resembling corporate America, where you've got a regular ratio of men and women in the same space. And this is going to have huge implications to how people interact in those spaces. Go ahead, Kate.
And all I can help thinking about is, yes, we are seeing, I mean, I guess we don't know for sure yet, but like the man in this case is paying a price of some sort, right? I mean, we can say that for certain. I'm not trying to speculate about the case, but like he is paying a price, whether it is a 1-year suspension, a reputational impact, as well as the suspension, whatever the price ends up being, we don't know yet.
And the Celtics already announced that he is the only person being punished in this story right now, I believe.
Being punished in a very like tangible way, but from a mindset of like, what will men who run professional sports do going forward? No doubt there will be a tax that is paid by the women in professional sports. I mean, there already is a tax to work in professional sports alongside men, which is like somehow you are responsible for men's sex feelings. Like, no matter what you do, you end up bearing some of the burden that like men can't help but think of you as, not all men, right? I can't believe I'm just saying not all men.
Did you really just say that one, Kate? Yeah. Mark that one.
Like, can we edit that out, Jeremy?
Yes.
But you're paying this tax of like, you show up at the workspace, you're not trying to make this a sexual thing, but no matter what you do, you end up being a sexual being.
You wore 3-inch heels instead of 1-inch heels.
And so I can't help but think that like some of this is like goes back to conversations we've had previously on Meadowlarkers, where you talk about why you don't want a woman in the locker room, and men will be like, because then I can't say and do the things that I like to do. And this is an extension of that. Well, there's some people when you read about the fallout of this story is like, well, this is what happens when you put women in professional sports within that inner circle. Like, this is just bound to happen. And so,
but isn't that appropriate, Kate? I mean, yes, that's precisely what happens. It happens in every single industry in the country. And if you're going to have a ratio of men and women in the office the same way you do at IBM or Apple or ESPN, then people are going to date each other. Like, I remember like when we had that summit at ESPN, the very first thing that I thought of when we walked out of there was, what do you expect when you have a whole bunch of 25-year-olds living in Bristol, Connecticut? They're all peers. They all, and especially because it's sports, they all work the same crazy off hours. There's nothing else to do here. Of course they're going to date each other. I go back, I mean, I'm glad I'm old now. I mean, go back to when we all started in the business. When I'm starting at the Oakland Tribune, we all were roommates. We all lived in Haight-Ashbury. Everybody lived within a few blocks. We all drank together, and this is going to happen.
When you subject people,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. When you subject people to a situation where there's long work hours and there isn't a lot of opportunity to have a life outside of this, rather it is discouraged. Having a life is discouraged. You got something better to do than this. Then,
not dedicated.
Yeah, you make the only possible candidates the ones who are available, and they're the ones that are around you. The problem is when, again, you introduce the power dynamic, which exists in corporate America, right? The VP and the admin or the account exec or whatever. But the thing that our business and sports have also with it, combined with that power dynamic, is the power of celebrity. Right. It's not just that the VP is giving me. It's that's the guy that hit the winning shot in the 1988 Final Four or whatever, right?
And it's a physical business. I mean, that is the. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, because we're kind of veering here. We're like, well, yeah, when you put women and men together, there are relationships. Yes, but there's something specific about sports dynamic, and it means kind of getting to it, where there is infused in sports a kind of like, where the egos of the men involved, and women too, but the egos of the men involved and their sort of status as being able to get any woman they can get, which is part of our kind of sports landscape, is infused in this story as well, because you may not have the same behavior patterns in corporate America that you would have in the sports world. And then in addition, if you were a woman in corporate America who had a power dynamic that was out of balance, you wouldn't then be doxxed online because there's a Twitter feud between two rival journalists who are going to expose this story before they actually have the right details about it. So those are two facets that are different than corporate
Hugely
America.
different. And also it's a physical business. That is what I mean too, is that this industry, the body is the commodity. The brain is not the commodity here. So people are attracted. You're dealing with people who are absorbed, essentially, whether you're talking about, whatever sport you're talking about, it's a physical game. And so all of it, whether you're talking about ego, celebrity, sex appeal, attraction, all of these things are rooted very much and very publicly right in everybody's faces. And you're also dealing, like as Kate was saying, you're also dealing with a man in that business where making sure every woman when you walk into a club is interested in you is part of the culture. I mean, the conquest of women is part of the sports culture, like it or not, right? I mean, it's there, and the women, women know it when you work in the business. Women know it when you're covering. How many times does a woman break a story, and of course, all the male reporters are like, "Oh, she slept with a player," right? We all know that this thing is central to this specific industry, and you add all of this together, and what you've got is a perfect storm. It's a time bomb. And when Amin was talking about celebrity, one of my friends was asking me, why is this so important? She was like, well, I don't really follow the sports piece of it. Why is this so important? It seems to me like what's really important, why everyone's really talking about this, is because Ime Udoka is with Nia Long. Nia Long is the headline. She's what's making all of this more important. She's the gasoline here. How could you cheat on Nia Long? And I'm like, and you start taking all of these different pieces to it, and you do have a perfect storm, especially, and that is also where the public and the private come in as well, because the relationship between Ime Udoka and Nia Long isn't anybody's goddamn business.
It's the TMZification, right? It's the idea that this makes it newsworthy on a level that people not following the sport or following sports are interested, because you've got a whole other population of people who are like, wait, someone cheated on Nia Long, which is wild, because the insinuation is that if her name was Nia Strong or Mia Long, all right, whatever. But I was like, not Nia Long, and I feel for her, obviously.
She was in Love Jones.
Yes, she was in Love Jones. She
was great in Love Jones.
She's great in a lot of movies. She's a great actress. But the point is, it really reveals a lot of what shitty things human beings are, right? Where it's like, in a way, that's the objectification of Nia Long, right? As the idea that infidelity is based on physical attraction, meaning if I'm going to cheat on my significant other, it's because there was such a greater option over here. Where in reality, most infidelity isn't like that. It's like I said, it's the one that's right there. It's the availability that really leads.
And those are all the private things that really have nothing to do with us or the Boston Celtics or this story. I think there's one last piece of this too, Kate, that I want to throw out at you as well. And to me, I just look at it this way. I don't think that you can have I don't believe consent can really exist in these spaces because the power dynamics are so enormous. I mean, like everything that we're talking about, how on earth can you have equality here? Like how on earth can you put yourself in the same, I mean, it just sounds very, very dangerous. Like when, like even when we're thinking about, okay, well, what were the Celtics supposed to do here? I think they could have handled it better. I mean, once that stuff is out, I think they had a responsibility to their female employees. I don't know exactly what they could have done. Maybe they could have just been faster. I don't know, but who knows what the TikTok was inside the building? Because it hasn't been clear where the leak actually came from. But clearly, from this story, what we saw was a lot of women working in this business who were exposed to some really heinous stuff. And like I said, and what's the cautionary tale here? I mean, what are you taking from this as the next time we're on Meadowlarkers having this conversation? Here's what we didn't learn from the Celtics Udoka story. What is the cautionary tale that you're seeing here?
For me, it's just a reinforcement of the life experience of being a woman in sports. Like I used the term tax earlier because that's how I think of it. I mean, when I was covering the Sixers, I never ran into any of these issues, but I also actively removed myself from every situation because I was thinking 7 steps ahead. And that cost me information, that cost me the pursuit of certain stories because I was never going to go out drinking ever.
Well,
ever.
That's right. Doesn't that go to the during the election? I think it was the 2016 election when the Washington Post story came out about how Mike Pence does not go out one-on-one with women in the business.
Not go out. He doesn't grant like one.
He doesn't even grant like interviews, nothing one-on-one. And I actually had a colleague of mine say something along those lines, and essentially was blaming women for this. I mean, I don't even look at women these days. I don't even say hello to them because I don't need some sexual harassment suit on me. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let's talk about this in a separate way here. I mean, like, you know what you're doing and you know what's happening here. But think about it from a female standpoint. The number of disadvantages that you now have if you're not part of the social world where information flows. If you're not in those spaces, you are at a huge disadvantage for doing your job.
Yep.
Do you guys remember the Washington football team was the beat writer for The Athletic, ran into these same issues. She went out in Indianapolis during the combine, which covered the NFL. This is, it's combine during the day. At night, they all go to St. Elmo's or whatever.
St. Elmo's Steakhouse, Indianapolis, yeah.
And they get the shrimp cocktail and they all get drunk, right? And I believe this was part of what basically set the ship sail for this investigation to the Washington.
Which, by the way, is still pending.
Yep. Was this higher up guy was repeatedly acting very lecherously towards this woman who worked for The Athletic. Her name escapes me now. I feel bad. But yeah, I remember they wrote about the first article that came out. I want to say it came out in the Washington Post, and it detailed all of it. I'm just like, this. I mean, like, but it's what Kate just described. It's like this woman's on the beat. Either I'm where all the gossip comes out, and I gotta fend off all of these untoward advances, or I can set up boundaries and walls and both say I'm not going to put myself in that situation, and also I'm going to make it abundantly clear I'm not here for any of the shenanigans, and in effect be left out of these conversations, and as a result not be able to do my job as well. It's a hell of a catch-22.
Yeah, it's actually no different than than all of the from the racial standpoint, the stories of not having, the all white country clubs and everything else. And if you're not in those spaces, you're not having access to the pipeline, to the jobs and the conversations and the stock tips and all of the things where the action is. If you're not in that room, you are inherently missing out. Yep. And yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a story that, and we didn't even talk about, one of the other pieces of it was the number of folks who have said, well, wait a minute, if this was consensual, then why is Udoka the only person being punished? And my answer to that was, it's not consensual because there's a power dynamic here. You have to account for that.
This could certainly stretch to Meadowlarkers 49, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
I do want to applaud us for not getting caught up in like hypothesizing about what could have happened inside the Celtics, and because I do think that the conversation that we're having, like the meta conversation about the story, is the only place to be right now, unless you're an actual journalist who is reporting this out.
And it's how you do your job. I mean, and the hardest thing about doing this job right now is the fact that the word media covers way too much ground. And the things that we're responding to, and the number of people who now qualify as media but don't have any sources, or the number of people who qualify as media who have access but don't know how to do the job. And so there is a way to do this job. And I actually, believe it or not, I know that the reporters are getting crushed for it in a way, but I do feel like, however this thing went down, there was opportunities where, where everyone could have done much, much, much better, and then in other areas where you're looking at this and it's just, it was going to turn in the minute it sounded like there was an impropriety inside the office between Udoka and however female staffers we're talking about, however many we're talking about, that it was going to become a frenzy, and it did. Hey, Jeremy, one thing we didn't talk about, if we can do one quick run around just really quickly and see if we can edit this out somewhere else. Sure. I want to go back to Phoenix for 1 second. If you can just put this back into the beginning of the conversation. I mean, that was, well said on Sarver, that there's nothing to add, but there is one thing that this story made me think about, Kate, and I just want your quick opinion on this. For 75 years in sports, you didn't make owners sell their franchises. That was like everybody knew what Donald Sterling was all about. He never sold his franchise. Everyone knows what Dan Snyder's about. He didn't have to sell his franchise. But starting with Sterling, and then moving into Jerry Richardson with the Panthers, and now, obviously Robert Sarver, now there is pressure that you can lose your franchise by acting a certain way. And like I said, Donald Sterling was acting like Donald Sterling for the previous 4 decades. But now we're moving into a place in sports where if you don't carry your ship the right way, you're out the door. That's a new place.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much impact it's going to have on the behavior of billionaires, because I'm not sure that they are going to think of themselves as they're going to think of themselves as beyond reproach, even though they might not be. Like, their everyday feedback loop that they are on is that they are beyond reproach.
And Sarver has positioned himself as the victim in this right now.
Yeah, and so on one hand you could be like, well, now they have to pay attention. They have to have some sort of like other voice on their shoulder being like, even though you're a billionaire who owns a team, you can't behave in XYZ or there are repercussions. But like, I don't think that that's the way billionaires carry about their day. So I don't see, I don't
There's
see
no
how,
deterrent here, in other words.
When you're a billionaire, by default, either if you made your billion, you had a bunch of people tell you couldn't do it, and then you did it. So you are a rule breaker by default. If you inherited your billions, you've lived your entire life not hearing the word no.
That's
so
right.
Again, so that won't change anything. I do want to quote one billionaire though. This is Peter Guber, who is the co-owner of the Warriors, has this quote that he loves: that there are no rules, but you break them at your own peril. And that perfectly sums up life in the NBA, particularly for the powerful. There are no rules.
Yes,
you could do all these things, but when you get caught, things.
And last but not least on this topic, and for everything Robert Sarver is talking about, when he sells his team, he's going to be the winner when he gets the check. And that concludes a marathon episode of Meadowlarkers 48. I'm Howard Bryant. We've got Kate Fagan and Amin El Hassan here. And next week we got Meadowlarkers 49. And I am thinking already off the top of my head who our honorary captain is going to be in right now. I'm thinking about Louisiana Lightning, Ron Guidry, my favorite, number 49.
Wow. You have a mind for numbers, because I would have had to Google, and next week I will come prepared having Googled. Yeah.
Well, as they say in the pirate ship, we'll put it on the poll.
Yeah.
See y'all.